Hi everyone, it's Plastic EP from Melbourne, Australia. I've got a fantastic author, Chuck Harter, coming in from the USA. How are you, Chuck?
I'm very good, Plastic. Thank you for having me on.
It's a pleasure. Now, I want everyone to know, right, you've written a fantastic book, and to me, the greatest Superman is George Reeves, without a doubt, right? And you've written a fantastic book called Superboy and Super Pup, The Lost Videos. Now, I'm fascinated about it, Chuck, and I want to know about your book, and I want to know how long it took for you to take it, and it's just been released. Just tell me about that.
Okay, well, it's funny. The book has just been released around September 4th or 5th, but in truth, I wrote it and it was released 30 years ago. It was my very first book, and it was put out by a magazine, great magazine called Cult Movies, which is long defunct. So it came out, it was a first effort, and they did put it out Plastic, but they didn't do much promotion. And, it was a first effort. Let's just put it that way. So I've done a couple of books for Bear Manor Media, and the CEO, Ben Omart, contacted me about 6 months ago and said, Chuck, I've got an idea. What is it? How about I reissue Superboy and Super Pup, The Lost Videos? And I went, really? Okay. It's only been 30 years, but it's great. So he said, okay. So it's funny, Plastic, how you can make a wish and it seems it'll never come true, but it eventually does. When the book came out 30 years ago, I had two images on the cover, one of Superboy, one of Super Pup. And I wanted them to be in color, and they didn't have the budget for it. And they said, I'm sorry, they're going to have to be black and white. And I said, I wish I could have had color images on the cover. Well, on the new one, they're color images. So I got my color images 30 years later. So that was kind of fun.
The thing is, I've seen things about Super Pup and Superboy on the net. They don't write much. They don't show much. They show these old slides. And people aren't informed and don't really know the beginnings and the real story, what happened after George Reeves passed away. But tell me how it came for you to write the book that far back, which for me is amazing.
Oh, well, it's a great story, Plastic. In the late 80s, and I live in Los Angeles for the benefit of those that don't know, I decided I was going to research the George Reeves Adventures of Superman series, okay? So I started snooping around, and I managed to find Jane Ellsworth, who was the widow of Superman producer Whitney Ellsworth. Very nice lady. So I went out and visited her, sweetheart. She had a few photos and so forth, but she did put me in touch with Jack Larson, Noel Neal, and Robert Shane, who were cast members. So I talked to them and so forth and so on. So a few years later, probably 1990, 91, she was failing. She was quite elderly. So I went over there, and one day she came out with a shoebox and said, Chuck, you're a good friend and a sincere fan, and I want you to have these. Well, I opened the box, and Plastic, to my astonishment, they were filled with original black and white camera negatives of photos of both Superboy and Super Pup. I almost fell over. I said, well, thank you so much. Yes, Chuck, these have been in the closet for 45 years, and I want you to have them. Wow. So as you said earlier, there was hardly anything written on the two pilots. Gary Grossman did a book called Superman Serial to Serial on the George Reeves Superman series. I think there was one photo of each and briefly mentioned. So I thought, wow, I've got all these great images. Maybe I should do a book on it, do a first book. So in those days, you couldn't see either of the pilots, but I had a friend who was underground fellow of VHS tapes. And sure enough, he had both pilots. He had Johnny Rockwell's interview, and he had some screen tests for the Lana Lang actresses. So I said, okay, so I got that. So then I started snooping around, and I managed to find three little people who acted in Super Pup who had never seen it because they shot it in 3 days. It went off to New York and they never saw it. and they saw it, and it was great. It was them and their kids, about 20 of us in the room, and they cried and hugged each other, and it was quite wonderful. I found Cy Simonson, who was a special effects guy on the Superman series and both pilots. He did an interview, and a guy named Ben Chapman, who was the production manager on Super Pup. Great. I had some actual people who were there. I finally got in contact with John Rockwell, who played Superboy, who was and is a kind of reclusive figure. And he got a kick out of the fact I wanted to talk to him about the Superboy pilot. And he told me that he had lived at Hugh Hefner's mansion in Chicago for 14 years because he was a world-class backgammon champion, and Hef loved to play backgammon. In fact, he said in the 14 years, he only left the mansion maybe twice. Think about it. Everything came to him. So, and he said Hefner tried to find a print of it because Hefner likes old movies. So anyway, he saw it, got a kick out of it, and I did the interviews. So what do I do next? So I knew two guys who put out a magazine called Cult Movies, and I talked to them, and they said, well, okay, you know what? Let's put a book out. We've never done a book. So my girlfriend at the time did the tech work, and we put the book together. And sure enough, I had a book written, and I was quite pleased with it, and it came out very well. Another thing that I thought was interesting was Superboy looked like such a sure thing that they commissioned 12 more scripts for a full season because they shot 13 shows in the last 4 seasons of the George Reeves series. Well, Jim Hambrick, who runs the Superman Museum in Metropolis, had copies of the 12 scripts, and he made copies available for me. So I said, okay, it looked like if it had gone, it would have been quite a good show. So all of those factors entered into it, and I got the book together, and it came out, and they did a little promotion. They covered it in the magazine, really, and then it just sort of laid there. And 30 years later, here we are back with Bear Manor Media, and I couldn't be more happy. And it's kind of like for the young me of 30 years ago, finally, it's going to be done right. So some people have asked, is there any new material? And there isn't. And the reason for that is there was nothing more to add to Super Pup. And John Rockwell did one visit to the Superman celebration in Metropolis. And I might have got 2 pages out of that, but I thought, you know what? 30 years ago, as a fledgling first author, I did this book. I'm proud of it. It didn't get what it should have. I'd like it to stand as the work that I did as a young man 30 years ago. So it's out. There's already 1 or 2 nice reviews about it, and I've been certainly hitting every conceivable Superman type Facebook page or blogger or websiter or anything just to promote it. And I'm really happy, you know, that here it is.
Well, Chuck, I've got to tell you, I'm fascinated by the book, right? And one of the things I learned from the book, which I didn't know that producer, Whitney Ellsworth, right, spoke to George Reeves in early 1959 and said, we're going to set up now and do 26 Superman episodes. And he was so happy about that. And then Superman's dead.
What happened was Whitney Ellsworth shot the last 4 seasons of Superman in color because he knew that in the 60s, the price of color televisions would come down. So they weren't broadcast in color at that time. They were in black and white. Super Pup was filmed in color. And so he sort of saw that as a future thing. So in early 59, George Reeves died in June. Wits and National Comics were making overtures that, you know what? We don't want the first 2 black and white seasons to go into general 5-day-a-week syndication because they're kind of violent or they're not color. So we need to shoot 26 more color episodes to get the package up, because I think in those days you needed 100+ shows to get a 5-day-a-week syndicated package. So they kind of made overtures to George Reeves. He was reluctant to do it because it had pretty much killed his acting career and he'd been typecast, and there were a lot of other factors we won't go into now. But the ironic thing was Whitney Ellsworth cared for George Reeves and, in fact, had allowed George to direct the last 3 episodes of Superman so he could get his Directors Guild of America card and build up a reel as a possible director. Okay. And so the deal that George was offered was 26 episodes, 5,000 an episode instead of 5,000 a week, and he would direct maybe a third of them. So he said, well, in that case, the money would save him because he was struggling. He'd get direction credits. Oh, okay, I'll put the suit on again. So it wasn't definite. And George Reeves had planned a wrestling tour over in Australia. He would have come to your neck of the woods and done Australian television, singing and playing the guitar. And there were plans for Japan. And so the day he died, he got a call from Whit Ellsworth saying, it's approved, it's a go. And he was thrilled, not necessarily to play Superman again, but all the other good things were going to happen. So he partied pretty hard in the day, and that night, a very terrible thing happened. But that's why they wanted to build up a bigger syndicated package.
I just want to ask you now about this tour of Australia. I never heard about that. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? I'm fascinated.
Yes, I can. In 1957, in the summer, George Reeves went out on tour of probably about 6 weeks, and he played state fairs or theaters. And the act consisted of him singing and playing guitar. He had a 3-piece Mexican band who also did songs. Noelle Neal went on tour with him, and she would sing and do songs. And the climax of the show was that he'd go off stage and change into the Superman suit. And he had a judo buddy that he'd work out with who had a Mr. Kryptonite costume. So Noelle Neal would be on stage as Lois Lane, and Mr. Kryptonite would come out, save me, Superman, save me. And he'd come bounding out of the wings, and they would do all these exaggerated wrestling throws because they were judo experts, partners. And the kids would go crazy, and that would pretty much sum up the act. And then he'd come out and he'd sign autographs. So the plans were in probably, I don't know, August or before the filming of the new season, was to go to Australia. And a reporter here in town had connections in Australia and was negotiating with him. And I don't know what the equivalent of Australian Tonight Show was, but whatever the most popular variety show was, he was scheduled to go on that, be interviewed, sing, the whole shebang, and then he died. And the bitter irony of it was 3 days later, an Australian representative contacted this reporter and said, it's a done deal. We have a representative going to hop in a plane today and come and firm up the deal. Oh, didn't you hear? And that was that.
That's amazing. I've got to say that. Being a baby boomer, right? Superman was the biggest thing on TV. You got no idea, especially in the 60s. Even though it might have been made in the late 50s, we're always, how can I say, behind the 8 ball from the US. So
right.
While we were watching in the 60s, and it was the most popular show growing up, and I was like at elementary school, that's what I'm trying to say, is that Australia loved Superman. And to me, this is why George Reeves really is so believable as Superman. And growing up, you got to understand it's part of Australia's culture. Like it is in the US, he was so important here. I'm just saying as a TV character.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I would say that if he had gone to Australia, it would have been massive. And the reporter was even in touch with, check this out, Tokyo Broadcasting. And after the Australian tour, he'd have gone to Japan and wrestled and done the act. Because in 1957, 2 years earlier, the Superman series went international for the first time. So it's being shown all over the world in like 30 different countries, including Australia. So it really would have opened everything up for him. So talk about at the last moment before this great new thing had happened, it tanked. And his girlfriend at the time, Lenore Lemon, was a theatrical agent, and she was negotiating in England for him to go over and appear in theatrical pantomime light comedy appearances. So that was happening. So everything was kind of on and up, but due to many circumstances, which is too much to go into at this time, didn't go. As you know, Plastic, the title of the book is The Lost Videos, and 30 years ago, they were the Lost Videos. But in the years since, there was a Christopher Reeve Superman DVD box set in a metal tin, and that had the Super Pup pilot. And it was kind of weird because the first half of the pilot is in beautiful color, and then it's a bad black and white print. Somebody broke into the archives and ripped off the second half of this one surviving color print. The Adventures of Superboy, somebody told me it's on a Smallville box set, but I'm not sure. It's kind of like in those days, you had to find somebody with a bootleg copy, and even now you probably still can. There's various clips on YouTube, but I don't think it's the whole episode of Superboy. But they're worth seeing, and I'm proud of the book. Please, check the book out, because these are part of the celluloid Superman's history. And some people look at the Super Pup pilot and go, oh, it's garbage, or it's silly or stupid or whatever. But it was made for 6- and 7-year-old kids in 1958 who were not sophisticates. You know what I mean? So, and cartoons were coming into prime time, big time at that time, like Huckleberry Hound or Yogi Bear or that kind of thing. So I think both of them could have gone. You can read the book to find out why, but I will mention why Superboy didn't happen. And do read the book, because there's a lot more good material. In 1961, when they shot the Superboy pilot, that was the first time that there was extensive 5-day-a-week syndication of the George Reeves series, still in black and white. It wasn't in color yet. So National Comics went, well, we're going to go color in a couple of years. We don't have to spend any money. We've already got the shows. It's going to be confusing. So no, we're not going to do it. And that's a shame that they couldn't be farsighted enough to see two different things. And they didn't. It's kind of like also in 1966, there was a Superman musical on Broadway starring Bob Holliday, and he was very good. And in fact, there's a commercial and a game show appearance in a film with him. He was great. Why didn't Bob Holliday be a guest on the Adam West Batman series? Makes perfect sense. They didn't do it. Why? Because the George Reeves series is color now, 5 days a week syndication, blowing ratings worldwide. We don't want a conflict. So it's a shame. I think it was more a marketing decision. But both pilots are fun. The book has 150 images, all kinds of rare photos and stuff. And one thing I did do was, having the 12 scripts, I had extra photos of John Rockwell as Superboy. So I contacted 3 different artists, and I gave them a photo, and I said, here's the script. Can you draw around the photo how it would have looked in the show? And they did. So it's pretty cool. You can kind of look at it and imagine, oh, I see, this one, the Outer Space Girl, or whatever it is.
With all the costumes and everything associated with the shows, where did they end up all this stuff from the original Superman series? Where can people see this, or have collectors got all this memorabilia? Where is this stuff?
As far as costumes, I think Jim Hambrick's museum in Metropolis has a few, a brown and gray one, which was for the black and white episodes, and then a color one. They're around, but most of the props and stuff are gone. They're just gone. And I think Superman is very much dependent on what generation. I'm sure kids who saw Chris Reeve in 1978, that's their Superman. You know what I mean? It's kind of generational. And I'm a baby boomer, and I think George Reeves was the best one. So the story of these 2 little pilots is interesting. They do exist. They're charming in their way. The book Superboy and Super Pup, The Lost Videos, is available at bearmanormedia.com, and it's now available in hardback, paperback, and ebook editions. And it's also available at amazon.com. So please pick up a copy of my book, Superboy and Super Pup, The Lost Videos by Chuck Harter. It's not that I need the money, but the people I owe need it awful bad.
I got to say, people go and buy this fascinating book. Now, Chuck, I want to ask you a question. When I did a tour of Hollywood, right, they drove past studios, right? We went Gower Street and we saw where the monkeys were shot. Yeah. And then there was this little studio. Someone said that's where they used to shoot Superman. What is the name of that studio?
Well, there were several studios. And I think they were referring to what was called at the time Ziv Studio, Z-I-V. And I'm not sure what it's called now, but it's still a working studio. Some of the others are no longer there. It's
amazing. But look, when we look at the legacy of Superman, I mean, it's a fascinating story about the writers. They came up with the character, they did everything, and then they sold it. I mean, you know, that's another amazing story that, you know, shouldn't have turned out that way, but it did. And it just shows the power of the character Superman, how great Superman is as a character.
Well, yes, that's true. And I think there'll always be a Superman in one form or another. I know the current Superman is not favored by many older fans, but a lot of young fans do like the current Superman. So it's like Tarzan, you know, in each generation, there'll be a new version of the character. And Superman is the first real big superhero, comic book superhero, and will always be there. So Superman will always be flying.
I also got to say, growing up with the New Adventures of Superman, the greatest cartoons ever made, I still love them today. And even the Superboy cartoons of the 60s, I love them as well. And Chuck, I want to thank you so much for being on the show. It's just a fascinating, riveting subject. And you know what? For all the Superman fans out there, I just want to thank you so much for writing this book.
All right, thank you. And perhaps we'll talk again sometime. So please, anybody that sees this, pick up Superboy and Super Pup, The Lost Videos, available at bearmanormedia.com or amazon.com. It will make me happy. Good day, mate.
Thank you, Chuck, so much.
All right. Bye-bye.